cyber unit?
I'm Rana Saoud. I'm an assistant special agent in charge here in Miami, Florida, and I actually cover all former immigration and customs violations under me, including money laundering.
Is that mic on back there? Yeah. You guys heard who they were?
I think you have it off. The other mic?
Does this one work? Okay.
No, the offshore working. I don't think it's basic.
It went on, I just didn't sound.
This works.
That one works.
Yeah,
You just take out.
they all work.
I think we'll all go with those.
As long as one works, it's fine. This one works. Okay, I'm going to try to play this video now. We've got to the technical support. Let's see if it jumps up. Don't run anywhere. How do you turn the volume up?
I'll turn it up.
The shop asks the bank if I'm good for the money. The bank checks its records to see if I've got enough in my account. If I do, it lets the shop know. It updates its records to show the movement of money from my account to the shops. Oh, it takes a bit of trouble. Now, if you wanted to remove the bank from that system, who else would you trust to keep those records and are not alterable or cheat in any way? I wouldn't trust you. I wouldn't trust you. In fact, I wouldn't trust any single person, but I might trust everyone. The idea is you don't have a central record of transactions. Instead, you distribute many, many copies of this ledger around the world. Each owner of each copy records every transaction. So, to buy something using cryptocurrency, I give the shop my details. The shop asks all the bookkeepers if I'm good for the money. The bookkeepers all check their records to see if I have enough. If I do, they tell the shop, and then all update their records to show the movement of money. So there's no way that a forged transaction can make it in. If I try to alter a ledger, it won't match all of the other copies and gets rejected. Oh, and one of them, at random, will be given a reward for some newly created cryptocurrency. This is how cryptocurrencies work. And remember, all of these bookkeepers, all of these ledgers, they're not actual people. They're computers. Lots of computers.
All right, that's cryptocurrency. You guys can all leave. We're done. That's it. But in all seriousness, I think this was the best demonstration that I could come up with is how cryptocurrency works. This is not going to be a technical explanation. Maybe the guy from SEC, Martin, right? No? You don't want to do a technical explanation of Bitcoin or cryptocurrency or the blockchain? I do want to say that both of these folks are government employees, SEC and Homeland Security, so anything that I say certainly does not reflect upon them or their agency because I want them to keep their jobs and, have wonderful careers. But in all seriousness, what you've got is you've got two people here that have a lot of specialized knowledge. I worked with Rana way back in the day in Orlando, and she's promoted and become somebody that's really embedded in the issue of cryptocurrency. Same thing with Martin. He's in a specialized unit with the SEC. And if you were at the earlier panel, one thing that you're going to find is that the government is on this. In all seriousness, I've got lots of contacts that are still with the enforcement agencies, and it's pretty remarkable that the United States government has really been on the cutting edge, in my opinion, for this. Didn't take this laying down. There's some other frauds I think that they probably did that with, but not with this one. So there's a concerted effort by not only the United States, but some of these foreign governments to really address these issues. Now, I just did this a couple days ago, and Rana told me that's not accurate, but that's what CoinMarket says. There's a lot of cryptocurrencies that aren't on CoinMarket, but CoinMarket is where you can go and find, if you get your laptops up, you can go and see the different cryptocurrencies that are being offered. So as of April 26th, there were 2,135 different cryptocurrencies. In addition to the ones we know, Bitcoin being the most famous. These are some of the companies, and this is probably a little dated because, as you can see, the slides say Offshore Alert London. We're not in London yet. Maybe we could all meet there in 6 months for the next one. But some of these slides are from London, and you'll see that those companies, they take cryptocurrency. They take Bitcoin. So if you want to buy yourself a Tesla this afternoon, go get your Bitcoin account, and I think you can probably get that done. Microsoft, Subway, and there's several others. So it's becoming more mainstream. And I think one of the things that, at least in my opinion, I think the blockchain technology as I know it, which is very limited, I think it's got utility with companies, but you're going to hear of all the issues that the panelists have and I have with the way that cryptocurrency is being used to conduct crime and illicit activity. And speaking of criminal activity, here are some of the things or different ways that it's being used. We're at a fraud conference, so we all know most of these different things. The ransomware, obviously, the go-to is Bitcoin because they can use that as a method of payment. Child pornography on the dark web, one of the best and easiest ways to make those purchases. And then there's some that are a little bit more serious than others. Material support of terrorism, I'll talk about that a little bit. Money laundering, obviously, narcotics. One of my colleagues this afternoon or this morning on the other panel, he opined that it was probably about 90%, maybe even higher, of the usage of the cryptocurrencies for criminal activity. A lot of it's on the dark web. And as you can see, that's a pretty imprecise estimate, between 8 and 23 million. That's how I do my accounting at my law office. There's a wide range there. So you see the different types of scams that are there. They're all there. We read about them every day, and it's just something that we have to live with. I'm not going to read that. That's a terrible slide. But an ICO is something that Martin's going to explain. It's a method for promoters to get capital to fund their initial coin offering for the new type of cryptocurrency, and it's wrought with fraud. The statistics are relatively high. I mean, you've got something like 90%, maybe higher of the initial coin offerings in the last few years have been fraudulent. And there's the slide. It said 80%. I think it's higher than 90%. And the different ways that they do it is hyping people to persuade to buy. There was a question, today, and I'm sure you have the same question, is how and why do people buy this stuff? It's just like anything else. You've got greed on both sides of any investment fraud. I mean, nobody wants to hear that, but that's the truth. You've got greed from the fraud guy, and you've got greed from the investor. And with cryptocurrency, some of the new marijuana type investments that are out there, everybody's trying to get on the newest, the new bright shiny object is crypto. So you'll run into a doctor. I've got a couple friends that are doctors that have money, and they're asking me about investing in cryptocurrency. I'm like, are you out of your mind? But they've talked to some other doctor who's talked to another doctor who apparently made some money somehow and is luring the rest of these guys in for an ICO. And these are just some of the easy ways to show that if you come across one of these things, the copied white paper is more or less the justification as to why or how this is going to be operated. And you'll see that they'll take a white paper, which is done properly by somebody, and they'll just cut and paste. And this morning we used Dancoin, so I'm going to sell Dancoin today if anybody wants any. Relatively expensive, just $1,000 cash before I leave. And you'll see that, I'll have my website, I'll have my white paper, and I'll have all of these, different things that will try to lure or induce you to, put the money into one of my accounts someplace. And of course, we know what pump and dumps are, and I haven't seen Martin's slides because he has none, but Martin has lots of content. And unfortunately, he couldn't come up with slides because of some restrictions at the SEC. But one of the recent developments, there's been an indictment out of New York. It was the not Coinbase, I'm sorry. What was the one out of the state indictment out of New York? just in the last month. It was one of my slides. It's gone now when we did the transition. But you're going to see there's all sorts of opportunity for market manipulation with the cryptocurrency because it is anonymous in a lot of ways. And so by the time that people can figure out that it truly is a pump and dump, that it's been manipulated behind the scenes by people that own the coins, there's an opportunity for fraud. And the same thing with Ponzi's. Obviously, it's a great way to facilitate and make your Ponzi even better, more robust. Use cryptocurrency. The money goes in, it goes out very quickly. And the selling, the upselling is, again, that's what something is right now. You've got a dramatic loss in value of Bitcoin. And I think at the time, when it was 7 or 8 years ago, the price was hundreds of dollars, and now it's in the thousands of dollars. And so those wild fluctuations in price lend themselves to possible manipulation. And then anytime you see crypto, you see blackmail. I think I use an example. I had one of these cases in the middle where people's, I don't know, these cameras on your phones, I've got like black electrical tape over mine. I've had it since I had this case at the U.S. Attorney's Office where somebody came in and was watching one of the victims. It was an underage girl, watching her for years, if not months, on her own computer. And one of the variations of that is that they'll have somebody that's looking at a porn site, and they're on the porn site, and then they engage the camera, and they're watching the person while they're watching porn, and then they use it to blackmail them. So just something that, and this is years ago when I saw the first one. And then the data breaches, that's something that's rampant in the cryptocurrency world. You constantly will see that there's hacks where millions and millions of cryptocurrency or worth or value of the companies being stolen, and it's not reported to the rest of the investors. And so now you've got a company that has failed to report that they've lost, $20, $30 million, whatever the case. And it's a pretty simple concept that it's where the money is. So you go to these cryptocurrency providers, and then if you try to hack into their system, you can become a very wealthy person very quickly. The exchanges and the wallets, there's just another variation of how the exchanges that, and Coinbase is that's like the gold standard right now as far as the exchange. That's the one that's the most legitimate and most regulated. I believe they've got their AML BSA person, a former DOJ attorney. So that's one, but there's several of them, and that's where you go to trade your Bitcoin or your other flavor of the 2,000 plus different cryptocurrencies that are out there. But with that being said, a lot of these other platforms have vulnerabilities, and you can see the number of hacks that have occurred just within, I guess within the last 10 years now. The biggest danger, so to speak, or one of the biggest dangers is cryptocurrency to support terrorism. And what you'll find, though, and this is a pretty recent test, it was a hearing, it was a subcommittee on terrorism that was in 2018. And while it could be used, right now, cash is still king. That's a quote from, he's an ex-CIA analyst that works for the Center on Sanctions and Illicit Finance. And, they've reviewed lots of cases, and they really are not finding, at least up to this point, where it's been used to such a level that, they can demonstrate that there was a terrorist organization that was using it to finance a large amount of their terrorist activities. A lot of this activity takes place in remote locations, so you still want cash, you still want something else that's tangible that you can trade physically. But with that being said, I mean, anybody that has any understanding of cryptocurrency knows that, as law enforcement does here in the United States and elsewhere, that we've got to be on the cutting edge of it and try to regulate it. And there's the global regulators, and there's several. The EU just did something within the last month now where they've combined forces with some of the bigger private financial institutions in the world to try to do the same. And I think Rana's, okay, and there's more examples of regulators in the EU. And countries, that's not the end. But I know that was very quick, but I want to make sure that the real experts have time to talk about, their presentations. And I don't know if we want to start with Ron or want to start with Martin. Okay, Martin will go. if there's any questions, just raise your hand. I think we have somebody with a microphone in the back. That's not the back, but anyhow, she'll run to you as fast as you can with the microphone.
So Dan's right. As a result of a lot of bureaucratic red tape, unfortunately, I'm not able to have any slides, but I do have some material I want to discuss. I am absolutely required to say anytime we speak in public that the SEC disclaims responsibility for any statement of any SEC employee or commissioner. So the statements that I make here today are only my views and do not necessarily reflect those of the commission, the commissioners, or other members of the staff. So glad I got that out of the way. Just because I wasn't sure what the audience, like what your all backgrounds were, I just wanted to kind of briefly kind of step back and say, so the SEC has a tripart mission, and it's to protect investors, maintain fair and orderly and efficient markets, and facilitate capital formation. So those are our the three goals we have with respect to our agency. The agency has 4,400 employees across the country. We oversee $82 trillion in securities trading annually in the U.S. equity markets and another $40 trillion in the fixed income markets. And we oversee and regulate over 26,000 market participants, which include investment advisors, mutual funds, broker-dealers, transfer agents, and the like. The laws and regulations that we're responsible for enforcing are primarily based on a disclosure regime, meaning that investors, both large and small, corporate entities and individuals, are entitled to certain basic information about investments when making those investment decisions. To that end, the SEC requires those that seek to raise funds through the sale of securities to disclose meaningful information, financial and other information to the public, and that information must be timely, adequate, and accurate. The Enforcement Division, of which I'm a member of, assists the SEC's mission by investigating potential violations of the securities laws and regulations and recommending to the Commission when legal action should be taken. So I'm a member of the Cyber Unit. The Cyber Unit was only created in the end of 2017. It was announced by Commissioner Clayton in September of 2017, but it was only until November, December that it was fully staffed up. There's only about 30 of us in the unit across 6 of our offices nationwide. And you can go on the SEC's website at sec.gov, and there's a link on there that specifically discusses the cyber unit and the types of cyber cases that we've brought. With respect to today's discussion, it's the SEC's view that digital assets, blockchain, and other distributed ledger technologies are very useful and hold promise as new and efficient means for carrying out financial transactions. And an initial coin offering is, again, if done properly, can be an innovative way to raise funds and provide investors with access to capital markets. However, if digital assets, tokens, whatever you want to call them, are being offered and sold, if they are security, and being made available to U.S. investors, the offering and subsequent sales are required to comply with U.S. securities laws. So the discussion, the remainder of my discussion is going to focus on how we've regulated these cryptocurrencies that are determined to be securities under the federal securities laws, including discussing enforcement actions that we've brought in the last year and a half. And the SEC has kind of been pulled in both directions. You know, some critics claim that there's been way too much regulation and we're stifling innovation, and at the same time we've been criticized for not bringing enough enforcement and allowing a lot of rampant frauds to occur. And so that's where the background that I raised. I mean, there are only so many of us, and so we have to be, you know, we have limited resources, and so we have to be very judicious in the types of investigations that we open. And rather than opening investigations to every single one, which we couldn't possibly do, we really do need to try to pick the ones that have a principled basis and will send a message to the rest of the community. So in the SEC world, the dominant question and the threshold question for any of our investigations is the cryptocurrency a security? If it's not a security, we don't have jurisdiction, and it falls to other government agencies to regulate those. Security is a very broadly defined term, and it doesn't just include stocks and bonds and things that everyone thinks of as securities, but it also includes investment contracts. And the terminology as to whether you call your coin a coin or a token or a utility token or some other type of digital asset, that terminology doesn't matter. If the cryptocurrency is security, then we have jurisdiction. And so the SEC's involvement in the cryptocurrency world kind of dates to July 2017 when the SEC issued what was called the Dow report. And the Dow report, very notably, was not an enforcement action. It was a report issued by the commission that held that this particular token, which was a Dow token, it was a security. And it really kind of set a place marker in the sand for us. So the reason it wasn't brought as enforcement action is because oftentimes the SEC gets criticized for regulating through enforcement, that people didn't know something was illegal until the first enforcement action gets brought. And so by issuing the Dow report as a report, not enforcement action, it really kind of set a marker in the sand that says, okay, world, you're now on notice. If your token has these particular characteristics, it's going to be a security and you have to comply with the securities laws. And so from that point, all the cases that we've brought have been based on conduct that has been post-Dow report, which was July 2017. What the Dow report did was it applied a standard that was set forth in a Supreme Court case from the 1946, called SEC versus W.J. Howey Company. And so the Howey Test is a very kind of well-known test that describes what comprises an investment contract. And so all of our discussions as to whether a cryptocurrency is a security really turns on the question of, is it an investment contract under Howey? And so Howey defines a security, an investment contract, as an investment of money in a common enterprise with an expectation of profits generated by the efforts of promoters or a third party. And the test is a facts and circumstances test. So it doesn't matter what you call things. It doesn't matter, how you purport them to be. What matters is how they actually are. It looks to the economic realities underlying the transaction, including the manner of sale. And post-Dow report, the chairman of the SEC, Chairman Clayton, stated, federal securities laws apply regardless of whether the offered security is labeled a coin or utility token rather than a stock, bond, or investment contract. Simply calling something a currency or currency-based product does not mean that it is not a security. So post-Dow, there's been a lot of kind of calls for the SEC to really kind of explain what are the things that we looked at in determining whether a token is a security. And so earlier this month, the Division of Corporation Finance, which is a different division from the Division of Enforcement, but the division that's responsible for assessing whether a token is a security, issued a statement called Framework for Investment Contract Analysis of Digital Assets. You can find it on the SEC's website, and it really kind of walks through in somewhat excruciating detail the factors that the SEC looks at in assessing whether a token is a security. And so, fitting within the Howey context, the two main prongs of the Howey analysis that really kind of dictate whether something is a security or not are really the two last ones, the reliance on the efforts of others and reasonable expectation of profits. And so with respect to reliance on the efforts of others, what this guidance that was put out by the Division of Corporation Finance stated, it kind of lists some of the questions that we look to. And those questions include, does the purchaser reasonably expect to rely on the efforts of a promoter, sponsor, or a third party? So are you really requiring someone else, whether it be the promoter or the sponsor, that there's continuing activity that they need to do in order to make whatever you're investing in work. And kind of the example of something that isn't that is Bitcoin. So the Bitcoin, the SEC has never officially stated, the commissioners have never officially stated that Bitcoin is not a security, but in all the actions that we've brought, it's clear that that's the view. And so when you buy Bitcoin, you're not relying on whoever is the person behind Bitcoin to continue to do anything in order to make it work. So one of the questions, again, in the non-Bitcoin situation is, does the purchaser reasonably expect to rely on the efforts of a promoter to do something with respect to the underlying coin? And so in the release, they refer to the promoter, sponsor, or third party as an active participant. So other questions, is the active participant responsible for the development, operation, or promotion of the enterprise necessary for the token to attain or grow in value? Does the active participant have to perform essential tasks or responsibilities to make the enterprise work? Does the active participant create or support the market for the digital asset by controlling the sale or limiting the supply of the token? Does the active participant maintain a role in governance, oversight, and control over the underlying enterprise that the coin would work on? And does the active participant maintain a financial interest or benefit in making the digital asset appreciate in value? So if the answer to those questions is yes, then it's more likely than not that your digital asset, your token, your coin, is in fact a security and must comply with the securities laws. With respect to the reasonable expectation of profit prong of the Howey analysis, the issue is really profit is a capital appreciation resulting from the development of the enterprise or participation in the earnings of the enterprise. And so if you buy the coin expecting the price of that coin to appreciate, it's more likely not you're buying it as an investment. If you have the right to receive dividend from the underlying enterprise, it's likely that that's an investment. If the digital asset is marketed, certainly we're going to look at how the digital asset is marketed. If it's being marketed as you buy this, it's going to go up, you can make money, it's going to be considered an investment contract. And lastly, however, price appreciation due to external forces, again, using Bitcoin as the example, Bitcoin goes up and down in value without any regard to what the actual individuals behind Bitcoin, the inventors of Bitcoin, are doing, then that's not evidence of an investment. So other considerations that we look at that were laid out in this guidance from the Division of Corporation Finance is if the digital asset is described as a cryptocurrency, can it be used to actually pay for goods or services without first being converted into another currency? Is whatever you're investing in, is it already built so that you can actually use that coin? It has actually some utility. A lot of the coins have been marketed, they claim that they're utility tokens, but they don't actually have any utility at the time you buy them. They're expecting the money that you invest in that coin to then build the system that hopefully one day will have some utility. In that instance, if it doesn't have utility at the time you buy it, more likely than not, the SEC is going to find that it's a security. The same day that the Division of Corporation Finance issued this guidance, they also issued what's called a no action letter. And so for those that don't know, a no action letter is when a party writes to the SEC and explains the situation that they want to do, and they ask if assuming the facts that we've described in this letter are true, would you recommend an enforcement action? And so there was a letter submitted by an attorney for an ICO called Turnkey Jet. And it was an ICO designed to raise funds for a kind of a fractional ownership or jet leasing, so you could fly, if you wanted to take a private plane. And so for the first time, at the same date in April that we issued this guidance, the SEC issued its very first no action letter in the kind of ICO space, and they held that the Turnkey Jet ICO was not a security, and therefore they wouldn't recommend an enforcement action. And what was unique about the Turnkey Jet ICO was the funds that they were seeking were not going to be used to build the platform that the coin could be used on. The funds that the platform, and it was actually going to be an app as well, were either already built or were going to be using funds from other sources. So the actual ICO funds weren't going to use to build the utility of the enterprise. The tokens would be immediately usable for purchasing air charter services at the time they were sold. And lastly, the tokens were offered at a price of $1, and that price wasn't going to change. So it's more or less like the Chuck E. Cheese token. You go in, you buy the Chuck E. Cheese token, you can use it right away, its value doesn't change. And so under those facts, the SEC determined that that wouldn't be a security. And so that was the first time the SEC had done that, and that was several weeks ago on April 3rd, 2019. So if your token is determined as security, then all of the securities laws applicable to securities apply to your token as well. So the offer or sale of that token must be registered with the SEC unless a valid exemption applies. And so we've brought in a number of enforcement actions. Again, I mean, the SEC only kind of issued the Dow report in mid-2017, so it's really only since late 2017 that we've brought enforcement actions in this space. So in December 2017, we brought a settled action against a company called Munchie Inc. that had done an ICO for a product, it was like a restaurant review app. And 2 days after the ICO went live, we brought the action. They immediately ended the ICO, returned everyone's money. And the charge was that they hadn't registered those sales securities. Towards the end of last year, the SEC brought settled actions involving two ICOs, one called Paragon Coin and another one called AirFox, for pure registration violations. Again, and these are cases in which we didn't allege fraud. We just alleged that the coins that were being sold were securities, and therefore they needed to be registered under the federal securities laws. Paragon Coin raised $12 million to implement a blockchain technology in the cannabis industry, and AirFox raised $15 million to develop a token-denominated ecosystem. They were the first SEC cases imposing civil penalties. So in addition to having to return funds to the investor, they actually paid penalties to the SEC because their conduct was post-DAO. So we argued that they should have known they were securities, and by not registering those, they were obligated to pay a penalty. As part of the settlements, in addition to paying penalties, the companies agreed to return investments to the ICO investors who file claims and to register the tokens under the Exchange Act Section 12G as securities. Those cases provided a model for companies that have issued tokens in ICOs and seek to comply with the federal securities laws. Then, of course, a lot of the ICO cases we've brought have been outright frauds. And so, of course, if you're offering tokens, the offer of the token must not be fraudulent. And so we've brought all types of cases alleging all manners of fraud. In a case called PlexCorps, that in their offering documents, they offered fictional returns. They promised returns of 1,354% in 1 month. Wasn't true. Shut it down as a fraud. In a case called Arise Bank, in that case, they had a fictional business plan claiming investment in decentralized bank offering numerous banking products, including FDIC-insured accounts and credit cards and services. Again, not true. Shut Arise Bank down. In a case called Centratech, the promoters of that particular ICO simply made up fictional executives. So they took pictures that they found on the web, they made up a background, they purported they had all types of industry experience, when in fact those people didn't exist. They also they made up claims of relationships with Visa and MasterCard, that they were going to have credit cards issued that so where you'd use your Centratech coin to make regular purchases. When we went to Visa and MasterCard to ask them about it, they had no idea who the hell we were talking about. So they had no relationships. In a case, Titanium Blockchain, those coin issuers claimed that they had 30 well-known companies such as Apple, General Electric, and Disney, as well as the Federal Reserve were customers of theirs, and they posted fabricated customer testimonials on its website. Another case, Tomahawk Exploration, touted the flawless background of its founder without disclosing that he had been priorly convicted he had several criminal convictions for securities fraud in his background. Can't do that. And fairly recently, in October of last year, a case called Blockvest. Blockvest was an interesting case. They actually claimed they were registered and approved by the SEC, even using the SEC seal on its website, promoting the ICO. They also created, kind of using the SEC's logo, a blockchain exchange commission, who also approved the ICO. However, there is no blockchain exchange commission, and there was no approval. We shut them down as well. If your token is a security, also, any person that promotes the token has to disclose the compensation received in exchange for the promotion. So in the Centratech case, one of the geniuses of, well, until they got charged by us and arrested criminally, one of the geniuses of their plan was to pay Floyd Mayweather and DJ Khaled to promote the coin on Twitter and the like, which they did, but neither one of them disclosed they were getting paid to do so. So we actually brought cases against both Floyd Mayweather and DJ Khaled for failing to disclose the payments that they received for promoting the Centratech ICO. Market participants that are involved in trading tokens also may need to register with the SEC as either an exchange or a broker-dealer, or companies which operate funds that invest in tokens may need to register with the SEC as an investment company. And we've brought several cases where we've charged persons with operating as unregistered exchanges, broker-dealers, and investment companies. In February of last year, we brought a case against an exchange called Bitfunder, and as well as the founder of that, a guy named John Montrell, and charged him with operating an unregistered securities exchange. We also charged him that he actually defrauded a lot of the money that was invested, and then ultimately his wallet got hacked and the money got stolen from him, which he also didn't disclose to investors. And so we brought a whole host of charges against him, but the relevant one for this point is that we brought a charge against him for not registering as a securities exchange because he was exchanging securities. Just last November, we brought a case against a gentleman named Zachary Coburn. Mr. Coburn was the founder of an exchange called Ether Delta, which was an online platform for secondary market trading of a handful of ERC-20 tokens. And the charge was for that, for causing Ether Delta to operate as an unregistered exchange. And again, we look to see the functional approach, look to see actually what the exchange was doing to determine whether it was an exchange. An exchange generally is simply any venue that brings together multiple buyers and sellers of securities using non-discretionary methods, which can be provided through an algorithmic computer program. So what Ether Delta did satisfied the definition of exchange under the securities rules and regulations, and therefore Mr. Coburn was charged with causing the exchange to violate those provisions. We've also brought cases against unregistered broker-dealers. We charged the self-described ICO superstore and its owners, which promoted a website to investors as a way to purchase digital tokens during ICOs and to engage in secondary trading. We charged them with operating as an unregistered broker-dealer. We charged an entity called One Broker for failing to register as a security-based swaps dealer because it allowed customers to invest in security-based swaps using Bitcoin and didn't register as a broker-dealer. And lastly, we have charged a handful of unregistered investment vehicles and advisors. Just last September, we charged Crypto Asset Management, which was a hedge fund manager and as well as the sole principal of that manager, for offering a fund which raised $3.6 million and invested in digital asset securities because it had failed to register as an investment advisor with the SEC. We've charged hedge funds for failing to register when the asset that they were investing in were digital assets. And we've also charged hedge funds with making misrepresentations and engaging in unregistered, non-exempt sale of limited partnership interests in a fund that invests in digital assets. So if in that instance, even if the asset that you're investing in is a security, if the digital asset is a security, you might have requirements to register as a broker-dealer, an investment advisor, or an exchange. And lastly, just in the last couple of months, the SEC has created kind of a new area called FinHub, and it recognizes that technology, including fintech, encourages innovation and facilitates capital formation. So last October, we launched this FinHub, which is designed to be a strategic hub for innovation in financial technology. The SEC doesn't want to stifle innovation in this space. It wants to make sure that ICOs that are committing frauds and the technology is used consistent with our federal laws and regulations thereunder. FinHub is a place for people that really want to comply with the laws but still want to bring innovation to the space, can come in and meet with the SEC, meet with the industry experts, the subject matter experts at the SEC, and get guidance as to how to do what they want to do properly and without breaking any of the laws. The end of May 31st, FinHub is actually hosting a public forum focusing on distributed ledger technology and digital assets. It's being held in the SEC's headquarters in Washington, D.C., but it is being broadcast live on the SEC's website. So if you're interested in that space and what the SEC has to say about innovation in the space, strongly encourage you guys to either come in person or to watch on the website. And lastly, the FinHub, this FinHub is also hosting a handful of peer-to-peer meetings where you can actually come in and meet face-to-face with the folks who are at FinHub. On May 3rd, which is coming up pretty soon, there's one in Denver, and in June 3rd, there's one coming up in Philadelphia, but I'm sure there'll be others rolled out. So before we take questions, I'll pass it over to Rana, and then if you have any questions at the end, I'll be happy to answer.
Yeah, I just want to add that the case that I didn't have in the PowerPoint or was in the PowerPoint that fell out was Bitfinex, Tether. It was an investigation out of New York. The New York Attorney General's office apparently did a press release, I think within the last week or so, they're taking that investigation. And there was another case, a $3 million case with a B, USA versus Agnavatova, I believe it is. And that's just a pure fraud. It's $3 billion gone. You've got to go put your slide up. And the other thing I just would like to point out while she's getting the slides up is that the enforcement actions from the SEC, the CFTC, if you just go on their website, your hands are going to get tired. It's like scroll. You're going to see all sorts of fake initial coin offerings, enforcement actions. The registration issue is one thing, but then there's just straight up flat, just fraud. There is no vehicle for the investment. Go ahead.
Yeah, the last thing I should have mentioned, actually, and I don't remember the date, but sometime last year, the SEC tried to alert the public as to the fraudulent nature of many of the ICOs by issuing what we jokingly called Howey coins to play on the SEC v. Howey case. And we promoted it on the website, on Twitter, really trying to replicate a lot of these fraudulent ICOs, promising gargantuan returns and absolute guaranteed return on investment. And then when you finally kind of click through to the end, there a screen popped up that said, had this been a real ICO, you would have most likely lost your money. It got a lot of press at the time, but it was one of the things that the SEC has tried to be proactive to really alert people that at least the majority of the ICOs, I don't want to say that we've never seen a legitimate ICO, because I'm sure there have been, and in fact, we just issued that no action letter earlier this month, but certainly the overwhelming majority of the ICOs that we've looked at, both myself and others in the cyber unit, the majority of them don't, even if they're not intentionally fraudulent, they can't actually do what they're representing to do. So, certainly caution everyone to invest with your eyes open and really kind of dig deep before investing.
So I get the final spot after lunch, so I hope everybody is going to be staying awake with us. I think if Martin hasn't demonstrated it already, he can tell you that our law enforcement efforts, and Dan and probably David Haas can attest to this, that we don't catch the smart ones. Generally, we go after criminals, and the ones we catch obviously made a mistake somewhere along the way. That was intended to be a little humorous, but again, post-lunch. So it's funny because he saved this under ICE. So how many of you guys have actually heard of Homeland Security investigations? Oh, good. A good number. Yay. So
Wait, you're not ICE anymore?
we have two components under ICE. One is enforcement removal operations. One is investigation. So I'm on the investigative side. So we investigate criminal activity. We came as a merger of the customs and immigration agencies in 2003 after the events of 9/11. So we took, fortunately, all of the good violations that were investigated by immigration and customs and made it into Homeland Security investigation. So anything that comes in and out of the United States, whether it's people or contraband, falls within our jurisdiction. Does that make sense to everybody? Yeah. All right, perfect. So, let me skip the slide. So I actually really like this. I found this on Cointelegraph. I like this slide a lot because it sort of explains how everybody views cryptocurrencies. And so I kind of want to see by a show of hands, how many of you guys think it's a scam? Okay. And how many of you guys think it's innovative and a quick way to send money back and forth to other locations? Okay, perfect. So we're kind of split as to where we are. In 2014, HSI, 2013 we started looking at this, but in 2014 we solidified our illicit digital economy program. And the reason we did that was we had the Silk Road investigation. Many of you may have heard of it. I'm actually going to tell you a story that brings a lot of these components together so you understand how we work these cases. And we had to look at how to address this phenomenon as it was back then, without, as Martin said, stifling innovation, but also looking at how this can be used to launder illicit proceeds, because our job obviously is to go after money laundering. Financial crimes are our second largest investigative area because we're consistently targeting transnational organized crime, and in order to do that, we know that it's fueled by proceeds, right? Why do these guys commit crime? They want money, they want to get rich, and they want to do it quick. So we relied on some FinCEN regulations to go after the unlicensed money remitters because we saw quite a bit of peer-to-peer exchanges. We were getting a lot of information from localbitcoins.com, and all of our case agents were asking us, how do we go after this? What is the violation? And, you know, there's a lot of structuring violations that were taking place. There's a lot of circumventing of BSA regulations. So we teamed up through our Cornerstone program with not just the traditional financial institutions, but Coinbase. So Coinbase Exchange came to us in February of 2014. I had just created the program in January of 2014 and solidified it, and we thought, what a great way to have Coinbase speak to our agents about what their business model is and what they're doing in order to combat any exploitation of virtual currency, cryptocurrency, whatever name you want to give it. So under the foundational components of what we created called as the illicit digital economy, because cryptocurrency, digital currency, virtual currency, digital assets, virtual assets were all names that were being used to discuss this. So one of the things that we really started looking at, apart from the criminal exploitation, is what are the challenges of this cryptocurrency that's out there, and we thought, hey, We looked at Bitcoin. It was the most prevalent at that point. We had seized quite a bit of it, millions of dollars worth, under the Silk Road investigation. So one of our agents who started looking at another online marketplace through the deep web, which was called Black Market Reloaded, they were sending weapons through packages and ordering them on the dark web. And he was really, really smart, forward-leaning agent. And he goes, I want to go interview Satoshi Nakamoto. And we're like, what? He said, yeah, I want to go interview this guy. And at the time, we're like, hey, it's a figment of somebody's imagination. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not true. So, we had all this pushback from our headquarters. And we thought, hey, if an agent wants to go talk to him and we have some money, why don't we send him? Let's find out how this works. So as it came to be, the agents flew out to California, and they realized that he wasn't alone in creating this. There were 3 other people, and they sat down and met with them and talked to them to find out how this actually works and what their reason for it was. And obviously the reason was not so that criminals would utilize it for nefarious purposes, right? But how many of us know that for years criminals have been utilizing traditional cash for nefarious purposes and finding ways to layer that money and then integrate it into financial institutions? At the end of the day, for us, we're looking at when this is actually liquidated, what they're doing with it, because it just can't sit in a wallet somewhere and then nobody's going to use it. There has to be an end game. It's the same with prepaid access devices and prepaid cards. We went through this for years. We were working with FinCEN. FinCEN told us, like, they want to come up with a regulation. We met with them in 2012. We kept going back and forth on this, and unfortunately, nothing was ever done. And so when we arrested this little guy named Chapo Guzman, maybe some of you guys have heard of him, the leader of the Sinaloa cartel, we actually interviewed 100 cooperating defendants, and they told us that they were moving money back and forth through the borders on these prepaid access cards, right? He doesn't want to see prepaid access cards, but it's like a means to move the money, and at the end of the day, you can get the cash out. Now we have Bitcoin ATMs in Colombia. As soon as you get out of the airport, you can actually cash your money. So, it's a way to just for them to quickly get money out without having to file CMIRs and go, through the customs regulations. So back to what we were looking at, right? Back to traditional money laundering. That's our game. That's what we do. That is our mission. So we started looking at the 3 stages of money laundering: placement, layering, and integration of these funds. So why is this so attractive to these criminals? So we had to come up with a platform to get our bosses on board with this so we can start getting money for our agents so they can work these cases, because obviously everything is driven by funding. So we looked at layers of anonymity. We said, look, that's a big challenge for us. So we have to defeat this anonymity in some of the dark web marketplaces. We have to defeat encryption, and we need tools to do that. We need resources. So we teamed up with our cybercrime center. We actually asked the DHS science and technology folks to come up with a blockchain analysis tool to help us out. So all of these were, falling within the different components of the illicit digital economy. And then we started looking at how are these guys circumventing the AML regulations. We looked at the mainstream adoption of different cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Litecoin. Those were the major ones at the time. And how the anonymous transactions can be tracked. Well, you can look at the blockchain all day and say, oh, there's a bunch of transactions, but that's looking at somebody's bank account. You have to figure out, why they went to Walmart and what was the purpose of that trip, right? So that's one of the things we started to look at through the blockchain exploitation, and actually have kind of a funny story to share about one of the best practices and good results that came out of the partnership with Coinbase. So Bank of America in Jacksonville actually just happened to see some unusual activity. These 2 individuals, a 19 and a 22-year-old who were roommates, entered the bank, and they deposited 2 duffel bags of cash, one for $50,000, one for $150,000. Has anybody ever heard of the story? Before I get into it. So this is really fantastic. These guys have actually gone to jail. They've served their sentence, and we were able to get $1.6 million as restitution back to the police department that actually started the case just outside of Jacksonville through the HIDA. So one of the things that transpired was Bank of America filed a SAR, and based on this fact that the 19-year-old dropped off $58,000 from the duffel bag to try to open an account because he was going to buy a house. The problem is, on his application to open his account at Bank of America, he listed that he was an employee at Chick-fil-A. So that was like, okay, red flag number 1. You're not making $58,000 in cash at Chick-fil-A unless you're the manager, right? So consequently, Navy Federal Credit Union also filed a SAR against this person's 22-year-old friend who claimed he was a computer whiz and had $150,000 that he wanted to purchase a home. So at the same time, we look at this name, we look at the transaction, it looked like they made their money through Bitcoin transactions. So we go to Coinbase, and Coinbase looked and said, sure enough, they had these wallets that were registered to Tweedledee and Tweedledum, as we like to call them. And consequently, we married up those SARs from Coinbase, from Bank of America, from Navy Federal Credit Union. It was a very tenacious financial investigator from the hideout in Jacksonville. It's actually Orange Park, Florida. And we started looking at all the transactions that took place. Well, how these two got their money, again, we're looking at a kid who's 22 and a 19-year-old. One worked at Chick-fil-A, the other one claimed he's a computer guy. They basically figured out that in one of the dark web marketplaces called Cheap Marketplace, you can actually, there's an accounting mechanism that was off. So basically, you could go in and put -2 BTC. It was like going into Amazon and like trying to, refund yourself something. It would spit out Bitcoin back into your wallet. So they started out with 2, 3, and then they, did a 6,000, and that returned money into their Bitcoin wallets. And then, they thought, oh, before we get caught, let's go cash this money out. So when that happened, Cheap Marketplace put up a sign that said, sorry, we're defunct now. Something happened, we don't know what, but 6,000 Bitcoins went missing. Well, that's what it was, is there was no accounting mechanism into their model. So these guys had tried to, take off with the money. And then they found a money launderer who was actually going to launder their proceeds for them in Houston, so he ended up getting arrested. So they cooperated, and again, we don't catch the smart ones. So obviously some of the challenges that we face are the global reach, the anonymity, decentralization. There's a lot of lack of know your customer and AML guidelines because of the anonymity or pseudo-anonymity that it provides. And then there's the incongruent regulatory regimes that we talk about constantly. What we regulate in the US is not actually in concert with what's being regulated in the EU, Singapore, China, Mexico, Venezuela's coming up with their own cryptocurrency. If they can get the lights turned on, I think that may actually happen, because they need the mining and the computers to work. So before I get into too much detail and turn it over to you guys for questions, I want to tell you guys a quick story about something that is near and dear, I think, to a lot of people, and that involves the opioid endemic in this country. So again, we don't catch the smart ones, but I'm going to tell you a quick story, and I actually have some characters for the story. And I wrote this last year for one of our assistant directors for a conference, and I thought it was just appropriate for today. So the background of these characters are fentanyl, right? For those of you who don't already know, it's a synthetic opioid, and it's about 70 times more potent than morphine, and it has been significant opioid abuse for years in this country. It's really just made it that much worse. In some cities, there's numbers of deaths attributable to fentanyl exceeding the number of deaths from heroin and other opioids. And like I mentioned, it's very potent, and the potency, if you do a hand-to-hand exchange, the exposure is ridiculous for cops. So when you're making undercover buys, it makes it really, really dangerous. The dark web is another character in our story. Obviously, most of us are on the internet, at least 10, 15 minutes a day, either checking social media, checking our bank accounts, or whatnot. Most Americans don't know there's a vast unindexed web, which is using tools like the Onion router, which is kind of like the Wild West of transnational crime. A lot of these criminals appreciate the anonymity given to them by the dark web, and they can operate sort of very rogue and unscrupulously across the internet. And then we have the issue of e-commerce, right? So in parallel with a phenomenon like the dark web, we have quick, instantaneous, go on Amazon, you get a package, you get it really quickly. Obviously, you're not going to be ordering fentanyl off of Amazon, but we're seeing a lot of packages coming in through our express consignment hubs and our hubs in Memphis that involve inspection by Customs and Border Protection and the U.S. Postal Service. Now we have cryptocurrency, which you guys all know, we've talked about at length, and it's a quick way on the dark web to facilitate the purchase of illicit goods. It's not the only method to purchase, but it is the most attractive way and quickest way and preferred method of payment on the dark web. So then we get to the investigation. So this is a case out of our Portland office that was based on an overdose death that happened in May of 2016. So there were 2 guys overdosed on fentanyl. One survived, one did not. So one of our agents who works with the HIDA in Portland went out to start this case, and they determined the victim purchased fentanyl on the dark web marketplace called Alphabay. How many of you guys have heard of the Alphabay takedown? So what I attribute to these dark web marketplaces is every time like the price of Bitcoin goes up to $20,000, we do a takedown of a dark web marketplace, and all of a sudden the value plummets to 6,000. So I'm always saying that Bitcoin's value is like one takedown away from plummeting. So one of my friends bought it. He doesn't believe me, but we'll see what happens in the next takedown. I'm trying to prove this theory. So essentially, with this investigation, they looked and they saw that the dark web marketplace Alphabay was a source, and the vendor used the moniker DM Kingpin. This is this guy right here. Law enforcement was able to seize a priority mail envelope. So it was a handwritten shipping label from the overdose scene, and it showed that the package was actually shipped from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. So these are all clues that we're putting together. We try not to tell the FBI that because they're consistently gathering intel, but nobody goes to jail. That was a like interagency joke. We argue a little bit over these cases. But no, essentially, the only way we do this is to bring our resources together to catch these individuals. So anyway, in July of 2016, we decided, hey, why don't we do an undercover purchase on Alphabay and try to see if DM Kingpin will actually sell us. But Alphabay banned the DNM Kingpin moniker because of previous sales. And so it basically put a stop on our case. So a year later, the Portland agents responded to 2 overdose deaths with the Portland Police Bureau. And then the investigation into those deaths revealed the descendants acquired their fentanyl from an Alphabay marketplace who used the moniker Narco Boss. So this is just some of the research that we did. So I'm going to go to this real quick. So we learned that Narco Boss's vendor profile was registered 2 weeks after the DNM Kingpin vendor was banned from Alphabay. Additionally, the Narco Boss profile picture for Narco Boss was the same photo used by DNM Kingpin, and then a booking photo for Chapo. Let's see, where is that one? All right, let's see. Oh, there it is right there. Sorry, I went too fast. So the booking photo for Chapo was there, and then while there's certainly no conclusive evidence that DNM Kingpin and Narco Boss were actually the same, we were like, okay, this is a hint, this is going somewhere, where do we go next? So the other similarity is that Narco Boss was selling fentanyl for the same price as DNM Kingpin, and it was sold as China white heroin, which had actually been banned. We thought, where to go next? So we started working with U.S. Postal Service and made a small purchase of fentanyl from Narco Boss on Alphabay. So a package came from Narco Boss, and guess where it came from? Philly, Pennsylvania. Another clue. So we reached out to our HSI Philadelphia office, and we sent a collateral case to them and said, look, between Portland and Philadelphia, we have to identify who this Narco Boss guy is and where he is working. So working with Customs and Border Protection to look at their data and our HSI Intel folks, we identified this guy named Henry Kona Coffee. Not the coffee you get from Hawaii, but an actual individual who lived in Philadelphia. And he had 14 imports of heroin or fentanyl from China and Hong Kong in a 1-year period. So the shipments were described as headwear, a T-shirt, accessories, toner, drill head. Several other shippers were shipping fentanyl and marked in the same manner, shirts, accessories, whatnot. So at that point, HSI Portland thought, let's reach out to Coinbase and see if we can serve a subpoena. And we learned that actually Coffee, who was the Narco Boss, is the previous customer of Coinbase's, and his account had been closed because they identified a high volume of Bitcoin transactions on the dark website Alphabay. So they had filed a SAR. We went and got the supporting documentation, and then what we looked to get the information, he actually provided a copy of his Pennsylvania driver's license. Thank you so much, Coinbase, for doing your due diligence, right, for your KYC and providing this information as part of your AML. So they actually thought ahead, and then once we looked at his Coinbase account, we realized that he tied it to a brick-and-mortar traditional bank account, and we were able to subpoena that account. And then we started looking at, and this is like the looking at his open source media, social media. This was actually on his social media. So, and then we started tracking the IP address. We worked with Postal, and then identified more shipments that he was sending out and more payments coming into his account. So we got a seizure warrant for the bank, and we actually grabbed $37,000 from his bank account. And then that bank had independently conducted their own due diligence, and they froze $100,000 from that account that was linked to a limited liability company. So there's a shell corporation associated with this individual. And all these payments were actually coming in through, it was all cryptocurrency payments that would be accepted, and then he would transfer that into traditional currency into his account. So based on the information provided by that bank, we identified the beneficial owners of these shell corporations that he was setting up, were established in the Bahamas, not too far from Miami, and third-party registrants were used to open those accounts. So from that information, we identified a third-party money launderer, and we started working to track those illicit proceeds. Without going into too much detail, because he's still facing trial, there's been all these motions that have been filed, and one of the things that I can tell you for the dark web marketplaces and those kinds of cases that we work, defense attorneys are always going to make the argument that how do you know it was this person, how do you know it was that? And we did a lot of work to try to tie him to that account, and the agents, I will say, did handwriting exemplars, address checks, the bank accounts, all traditional investigative techniques to try to identify the illicit activity taking place. So these are just the postal shipping records, and then there's his passport application. Obviously, he needs a passport to go to the Bahamas. So we did all of these comparisons, and obviously we tied that it was him, but we're still tied up in court 2 years later attempting to go to trial. So what are some of the charges that we look at? Obviously, without the regulation, that definition of what cryptocurrency is and where it falls under BSA, and Title 31, we look at, obviously, money laundering, operating as an unlicensed money remitter business. We start charging individuals with narcotics and weapons trafficking because those carry stiff penalties, specifically now with fentanyl, and then if there's large cocaine shipments, we can attribute to them. Then we also can charge them with importation, which is 952. That's always our favorite charge, especially when we're arguing with DEA. Dan knows all about that. And then we've seen a lot of carding cases, so there's huge ransomware issues that come up with carding, and then whatever the SUA may be, we will go after it. And that is pretty much the end of this presentation.
If you could you back up a couple slides real quick? Sure. I think there's a question in the audience.
Yes, sure.
Keep going back. Go back. Can you tell me what the refund policy is on that China white heroin? I'm just trying to figure that out.
Refund at your own risk.
Seriously, now's your opportunity. I mean, she's done a lot of work, and so has Martin with the, with this crypto stuff. So if you've got any questions, go ahead, raise your hand. So I forgot she's here. Okay, go ahead.
I have a general question. I know why the crooks are using this as a medium of exchange. I cannot understand why individuals put their money into this. It's like the tulips. It's to me, it's amazing. Have you tried to figure out, a fool and his money are soon parted, and if it's too good to be true, it probably is. There are all those memes out there, but they don't seem to believe it. Why do people buy this stuff?
I mean, I think the reason is the oldest reason, greed. I mean, people think that like they're get-rich-quick schemes, and so, I mean, for the same reason that people do a lot of dumb things. I mean, I really think that because they think they're going to make a lot of money doing it, and so they lose their judgment and don't do their homework, don't do their diligence into the substance of the underlying investment, and they think they're going to get, they'll get in at a low price and it's going to go up and they can get out before it crashes. So that's been my experience.
Yeah, so for some of the stuff that we've seen with individuals that are actually purchasing it for licit purposes, not illicit, some have thought that it's a quick way to make money. So like the ones that bought it back in 2009 when it was super cheap, now, when it went up to $20,000, $21,000, some cashed out pretty quickly, so they thought it was a quick investment. Others like it for the feasibility of exchanging money very quickly and then making a payment from the US to Hong Kong without the wire transfer fees, and it's an instantaneous transfer. You get that pretty quickly, and then you can see on the blockchain if that transfer actually went through. Those are some of the normal people's transactions. Unfortunately, like cash or any other capability, criminals will find a way to exploit it.
Yeah, and as far as just the nature of cryptocurrency, I mean, one of the premises is that there's a huge unbanked population in this world that doesn't have Amex in their wallet. So this gives them the ability to go ahead and to make purchases worldwide. So it does have legitimacy, but for the most part, like we've just spent the last hour telling you, it's being used by the crooks One thing I always tell people to do, and it's such a simple thing. I mean, look, I'm on the other side now, so I have these people accused of fraud, okay? They're not guilty yet,
clients,
whatever. They come in, and it's amazing that nobody just Google's amazing. I mean, I can't, it sounds common sense, but you Google these people, and what you find now, the same guys doing these kinds of frauds, they're the same guys that were doing the microcap pump and dump schemes 10 years ago. It's the same guys. Just Google them. It's crazy. Anyhow, don't do that. I mean, just...
One thing that I would like to add too is that, like, when we're looking at it from the criminal aspect for the money laundering, for us with cryptocurrency, ultimately it has to be liquidated for cash at some point. So we do treat it like currency, even though it can be a security or it could be, you know, an asset. I know IRS has defined it as an asset. There's always going to be these different regulatory debates about how it should be defined. But when we're working criminal cases, we treat it as, you know, a ways like to launder money. So we look at it as currency.
Any other questions?
Sorry, just you guys, great presentation. I'm just curious, kind of two pieces of the puzzle there. Like you said, banks are kind of a key part of this because in order to move the money, there has to be banks involved, bank accounts, things like that. If kind of on when you're a fraudster doing these fake ICOs, are there any red flags if you're a bank and you have an account with that company to either in the risk assessment phase at the outset of the relationship or in the transaction monitoring that they can see that this is not real, that this is some kind of fraud? And then lastly, these professional money launderers, are there any red flags as well for banks to kind of parse out that, again, this account is tied to these professional money launderers?
So I'll take the first stab. With respect to your first question, actually banks aren't involved. I mean, part of the reason when you're sending in money in exchange for whether it be Bitcoin or some other coin, most of these ICOs, again, a lot of the payments are coming in Bitcoin, and then in response you're getting Dan coin, you're getting some other coin. So the major banks actually aren't involved in that transaction. Now, ultimately, the promoter behind it is presumably turning that, you know, the Bitcoin into cash, but they're using some of the Bitcoin exchanges. So some of the major Bitcoin exchanges, like Coinbase, do actually do a lot of the know your customer and comply with AML requirements. Obviously, most of the ones that are overseas that aren't in the U.S., you know, it depends on the regulations and the laws in their country as to what type of AML requirements they do. There's some places where they do no AML, in which case they really become functional dead ends for us. But that's exactly it. I mean, the major banks aren't involved in this to most extent.
So one of the things that we look at is traditional violations of the Bank Secrecy Act. So what we look at with the banks when we talk to them, and we do a lot of outreach through our Cornerstone Outreach Initiative, specifically with just exchanges, right, for cryptocurrency, and chain analysis companies. And one of the things we tell the banks is these are some of the red flag indicators to look for. So any abnormal transactions, anything that doesn't comply with the reporting requirements, anything that should involve a CTR that there's not one that's filed, or if there's a business that somebody set up, it looks like a shell corporation and there's money going in, money going out without any explanation to that, or anything that looks completely suspicious, we ask them to, the whole point of a SAR is a suspicious activity report. Doesn't mean we're going to act on it. But a lot of times they'll call us and say, hey, we're seeing X. How do you guys define that? And we're like, that sounds suspicious. So what they'll do is they'll file a SAR and then they send it to us.
Yeah, and just to opine on the issue of the banks, all banks aren't created equal, and one of the vulnerabilities in the banking system, in my opinion, having been around it, and former general counsel for a bank, is these smaller community banks. They just don't have the level of sophistication, and they're trying to make money, right? They're trying to make a profit, and so a lot of times they're BSA, AML officers. It's a collateral duty, and they were a teller, they were somebody that was a line banker. Maybe a year or so ago, they went to a couple conferences, they got a certification. Now they've got somebody coming in trying to push something in cryptocurrency. It's new, it's shiny, it's going to make the bank some money, and so they don't have that same level of sophistication or exposure that the big banks have. I don't know how much more time we got. I think we're supposed to end now, or we got 5 more minutes. I'm sorry.
Lad Brown here. About 6 months ago, 5-6 months ago in Miami, we had the first reported real estate transaction all in Bitcoin. Puerto Rico, at least from press releases, is moving forward with the first virtual currency banking with only virtual currency, how do we stay ahead of the curve if these things are moving to actual, I'd say a brick and mortar bank that's doing virtual currency as its only means of exchange? Is it growing exponentially, and can we get a handle on it, or what's going on with that part?
So essentially, what we're doing in that space is educating all of our people so that they stay ahead of it. So when they see something that is nefarious, the thing is that we can't define all of it as nefarious activity. They're not all bad actors in that space, but we know that bad actors are going to use that space to further their criminal activity. So one of the things that we do is we get ahead of it. We sit down with those banks, we sit down with the regulators, and we give them a overview of what we've seen. And we're also doing internal capacity building, so with our agents. So now there's used to be a monthly call that discussed every single trend that every agent was seeing. So our people in headquarters, so Tom Sophia is here with the illicit finance and proceeds of crime unit. They reach out to our office in Puerto Rico. They have a pretty robust money laundering group, and then we have the El Dorado Task Force South right here in Miami. So when we see that type of activity, we try to get ahead of it. To answer your question bluntly, a lot of times we have to react because we try to be proactive, but without anything giving us that this is going to involve some sort of money laundering or some sort of fraud that we can report and start investigating, it's very difficult for us to just go after them. But we put it on like sort of our suspicious activity list, and we follow up with that.
Anything else? Going once? Oh, there's a taker.
Is the Jesus coin on your suspicious activity list? If you don't know it, it really is a coin called a Jesus coin, and it promises faster sin forgiveness than you.
In Miami, it's actually called La Jesus coin. So.
Okay, thank you.